So again, I'm really happy to have everyone here today, and thank you so much to our panelists for coming on this morning down to CRC. And first, I'll start on this end. I'd like to introduce Dr. Cristina Torres. And Dr. Torres is a bioarchaeologist who works in northern Chile. She earned her BA in anthropology from UC Berkeley and her MA and PhD from UC Santa Barbara, which is where she and I met as grad students. She is currently the professor and chair of the Department of Anthropology and Heritage Studies at UC Merced. And she is a first-generation American born in Miami to a Cuban father and a Colombian mother. And sitting next to Dr. Torres is Jessica Morales. And Jessica is a PhD candidate in the Department of Anthropology at UC Davis. She was born and raised in East LA to Mexican immigrant parents and is a first-generation college student. She started her academic career in community college and transferred to Cal State LA, where she completed her BA and MA in anthropology, with an emphasis in archaeology. Her dissertation explores the relationship between humans and dogs in prehistoric Alta and Baja California, particularly how humans enhanced hunting efficiency by using dogs. And then welcome to Andrea Lemus Noyola. Andrea is a fourth-year grad student in anthropology at Sac State. She earned her BA in anthropology from UC Santa Cruz and has very long-term interest in community work. So currently, she's doing an MA thesis project in cultural anthropology that addresses issues of community, government, and infrastructure in the small town of Rich Grove, located north of Bakersfield in our vast Central Valley here in California. So welcome to our three panelists. Thank you so much for being here today. And actually, I think I have the first question. So I'll go ahead and pose it, and then we have some students who will also pose some questions. So, and this time we'll just start this way, Christina, and then Jessica, and then Andrea. So our question is, tell us a little bit about your background and how you became interested in anthropology.
All right, I'm not in love with the mic, so I'm going to do the best I can here since you're recording. My name is Cristina Torres, like you heard in the bio. I became interested in anthropology kind of in a weird way, I guess, or in a non-typical way, I guess. My father's an art historian, so he is specifically interested in the pre-Columbian Americas, and because of this, we traveled. He did work in Colombia, where my mom is from, for a while, and then he started working in Chile. And so I grew up kind of in and out of museums, and I had this kind of deep and abiding love for museums. And so I'm a professor now, but I've done curatorial work and worked in museum studies as well. So I kind of came to it because because I grew up with it, because I loved it that way, but also because I wanted a job and a future that would let me go places, I think was ultimately kind of the thing. I did not really appreciate these jobs where you had to stay somewhere. So that's me.
Hi everyone, I'm Jessica. I was introduced. I will work the mic. So I became interested in anthropology in community college. So I also started in CC. I attended East Los Angeles College for about 3-4 years. It took me a while, and that's because I was interested in everything. I share that with you. By the time I transferred, I had enough credits to be anthropology major, philosophy major, history major, and maybe 2 more that I can't remember right now. But anthropology really captures a little bit of everything. And as I will share later, that's really what captured my attention. I was really fascinated with people behavior, right? We're interesting, we're unique, and we'll always bring this up. We're unique, but we're not all that different. And I think there's something really amazing to that. And I also was always fascinated with animals. And so now I study um, animal remains in archaeological sites to better understand, or reconstruct human behavior from the past. I also come from, like I said, Mexican parents. My parents are actually from a very small town or village in Mexico. And so these are very remote places that don't really get out or get public attention. And I think in reconstructing, people's behavior through food, like animal remains, or reconstructing just their ways of life. It really gives voices to these people that don't otherwise get to share their story. And that's where my interest in archaeology and reconstructing the past comes, in a nutshell. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Andrea, and I became interested in anthropology honestly not that long ago. I had no idea what it was when I first started my college career. I started as a bio major, and I was dead set that I was going to be a veterinarian. And then I never even made it through like my prerequisite classes. I failed like several classes, and I did retake them and I passed them, but I was like, oh girl, like I don't think I can do this long term. This is really difficult. So then my advisor suggested that I transfer some of the prerequisites that I'd passed and use them for an anthropology major instead. And I really didn't know if I would like it or what it was. So I started off in a upper division course called, I think, Feminist Ethnographies, which is like more of a cultural type of class. And it really taught me that anthropology gives you a lot of tools to understand that there is a why to the things that we do. There's like nothing like there's natural laws, right? Like you can't stop rain from falling or you can't stop like the wind from blowing, but there's a very specific reason why we dress the way we do, why we talk the way we do, and those reasons are connected to like our culture and politics and these forces that we can understand and study. So I was very enamored with that idea of like explaining essentially like the feeling that you get of culture shock, like when you go to some place that's extremely different than your own and you realize like this person that I am, somebody taught me how to be this way, but I can be something else too, or I can like learn how to be different things, and people are different things. And so that's the part of anthropology that I just really fell in love with, and now I'm really trying to like continue. And I feel like it's not as cultural anthropology doesn't seem like as fancy sometimes as like bioanthropology, at least going into it. But I love like Jessica said, I love people and I love trying to understand like like how did you become this person essentially, like there's a reason why you are who you are, and I'm very curious because I had a very different upbringing, and it even helps me understand myself too. So this is what I really love about anthropology.
I think so. I come from the bio side, just in reference to that comment. But I think that one of the most interesting parts of anthropology is where cultural things speak um, to the bio side, right? So that you're not. I mean, not that there's anything wrong with this, but like I am not personally interested in like the angle of my femur and why I can walk on two legs, right? I'm interested in questions about how all of the things that you just mentioned play out on the human body, right? And so the body is ultimately this vehicle for culture and for the choices that you make and the foods that you eat and all these kind of things. So I think that Anthro opens this door where you can consider a biology and a pre-health or a pre-med kind of um, track and take into account the fact that we're people and not just organisms. Yeah. So the bio side is variable, I guess is what I'm trying to say.
Hi, everyone. My name is Miranda Rakucci. Good morning, and thank you all for being here today. My first question is, where did you go to college, and what was or is your college experience like, both good and bad?
Okay, so did my undergraduate at UC Santa Cruz, and then I'm currently doing my master's at Sac State. My experience at UCSC was great. It's a beautiful campus. If you guys have ever visited, it really feels like kind of like a magical fairyland, I guess. But I grew up in an extremely small town that was all Mexican, essentially. I grew up in Mexico and my family moved here when I was 4. So I didn't even know that I had an accent until I moved to Santa Cruz and somebody told me like, where are you from? Like you have an accent. And I was like, well, I think you have an accent. But I loved it. I got to meet so many new people, and it was also the first place where I actually felt like a minority. That's something that I never experienced before either. And it wasn't until I got there that I realized that there wasn't a lot of Latinx people on campus, and I became very close to like the few people that were, and it almost made me feel like even more. It's just interesting. Like I never felt like I needed to be proud of who I was until I realized like there's not a lot of us here, so the few of us that are here kind of have to be loud. And had a lot of a really fun time like getting involved with campus organizations that were kind of centered around the Latinx identity, and getting to know them and getting to know their experiences, and how we were similar and how we were different. So that was really like Santa Cruz was really the first time where I felt like I'm very Mexican. Like I'm very Mexican actually. And it's funny how other people reminded me of that, but also at the same time I chose to fully step into that and try to like practice that identity in ways that felt like good to me. Like I did like folklorico dancing, and I was like involved in like a organization on campus that was very much about like Latina empowerment. So everybody has a different goal, I think, for how they want to to see like Latinos be portrayed, whether it be in higher education or whether it be in the workforce, and working with people trying to figure out when we come together collectively, what does that goal look like? That was very interesting as well. So, and in Sacramento, I started my master's when I think fall of 2020. So it was like peak COVID. Like I started online, and as a lot of you guys know, like online is just a weird place to go to school. I didn't meet any of my professors or fellow students for a long time in person, and it just was a very lonely experience. And I don't think I had even been to the campus when I started my master's. And I think it was like fall 2021 when we finally came back in person that I finally met my advisor like in person. Um, and like really the people part of school is like the most important part to me. Yeah, like classes are obviously extremely important, like you need them, but community is something that I feel like I can't live without, and getting to know the people in the anthropology department has been like the thing that has really kept me going. And I was really struggling before, but being able to go out with other classmates and complain about the curriculum or complain about the other professors, like that was essential as well. And just like I think once you get to like a graduate level, I don't know if you agree, but developing those relationships with your professors, especially with like your advisor, is just something that you absolutely need to do. And it's something that I felt like I couldn't do in a classroom setting, because who I am in the classroom is very different than who I am outside of the classroom. And I feel like I enjoy outside classroom me more than like classroom me. And I think my professors do too. It's just a lot more opportunities for you to really like show them who you are, like your personality. And these things matter because we bring them into the classroom. So they should also be taken into account. I don't know if that answers your but yeah, great experiences on both campuses. Sac State is also like a beautiful campus. I'm obsessed with trees, so I think I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be.
So as I shared earlier, I started in community college. I was working part-time and attending full-time classes. I think that adds to the story of why it took me so long. So I worked a lot of retail jobs while doing community college. As I said, I was still figuring out what I wanted and still figuring out a path to get to that. And then once I transferred to CSULA, so that'll be California State University, Los Angeles. Sometimes they're like, "Oh, UCLA." I'm like, "No, no, no, different school, still in LA." Um, Once I transferred to CSULA, that's really where anthropology and archaeology really took off, and that's where I met who became my mentor through my BA and into my master's, and really is still a mentor, colleague, and advisor until now. And I worked with a lot of graduate students once I got to CSULA, and that really, that made the discovery of, oh, there's graduate school, right? It doesn't end here at the BA level, and there are actually opportunities. Once you start doing research, once you start working with other people, and it's also where I first attended a conference, an archaeology conference. So this was over now 10 years ago. So my first conference was the Society for California Archaeology. So if anyone's interested in archaeology, it is a California-based conference, and it alternates between Southern California and Northern California. And so they rotate each year's up here, then it's down there. But one of my first impression was like, wow, there's like not a lot of like Hispanics or Latinos. Like I am the brown person here, right? And on one side, it's good because people remember you. There's a lot more diversity now, but not so much when I first started. And so it became a thing. It's like, okay, well, if I do a good presentation, people will notice because I am the Mexican there. But if I do a bad job, people will notice because I am the Mexican there. So that kind of gives, it kind of intimidates you sometimes, but it's also, as you mentioned, very encouraging because now you are, that Hispanic, that Mexican, and there is that type of representation that's happening by you simply being there. And I think that that idea or that concept, as you were talking about, like I never thought, oh, like I'm Mexican, because I also grew up in a very Hispanic community, East Los Angeles College, CSULA, very Hispanic population that's there. But as you start going into, especially within academia and these conferences, there's not a whole lot of, I guess, diversity in a lot of these conferences and in a lot of these settings. There is some more now, but not so much when I had just first started. And so it became, I became very conscious also of like, okay, I am the representation. I also started doing more outreach, and I think when I started getting back the thank you notes from like kindergartens or fourth graders, and they would be like, "Oh, thank you for being a brown face," where I otherwise thought, it was only like a white person job that you could do this. And so that encouraged me to continue more into academia. I started working with undergraduate students when I was doing my master's level, my master's degree, and I continue to work with different students now. And I think it's also part of guiding students through the education system, because as I said, I didn't know about graduate school when I went into CSULA to complete my bachelor's. When I did learn about graduate school, then I did a master's, and then I said, well, then maybe I can do a PhD. And because I was very involved in doing the research, it was I wouldn't say super easy, but it wasn't so hard, I think, for me to apply and then go into a PhD program. As far as hard experiences, well, as we mentioned, COVID, I actually lost my father to COVID in 2021. I had a collapsed lung from COVID, and 3 months, no, 4 or 5 months later, I took my qualifying exams and I became a PhD candidate. So there has been some bumps in the road, but I think that determination as being, Latino or Latina, and just, trying in recognizing the hardships that, our community faces, I think there's some of that encourages you to keep going. And so I always encourage students to remember that. But always put yourself first. Don't ever think you have to, keep going just because your community needs you to. Always recognize where you're at and recognize where you want to go, and go from there. And there will always be opportunities. There are always people that are willing to help you. And like I say, knock on doors and somebody will eventually let you in. And yeah, I could go on, but I'll leave it at that.
I went to UC Berkeley for undergrad. I so like I said, I grew up in Miami, which maybe doesn't sound like a particularly Hispanic or Latino place, but the Miami that I grew up in the 80s was basically a really Cuban space. And so I think in that sense, coming to Cal was shocking because as someone growing up on the other side of the country, I don't think I had a sense of how different the Mexican experience was. And Cal's predominantly Mexican. I teach at UC Merced, which is actually predominantly Central American. I mean, I have a lot of students who are Mexican, but I have a lot of students that come from other countries kind of in Central America. So we had an emphasis, I mean, we were treated differently, right? So we had an emphasis always on language. For example, like I grew up speaking Spanish at home, and I got to California, and that was not part of kind of the identity of a lot of the kids that I went to school with. And everything was kind of very, and it was the 90s, right? So La Raza and like folklorico and all this kind of stuff that is not a Caribbean kind of experience. And and at some level, the university didn't know what to do with that about me, actually, because then they put me in the Mexican American theme house and other things like that. So that experience was, I guess, odd, but it was good. And I made one of my very best friends there, who was my freshman year roommate, who's now a Chicano Studies professor at UCLA. So I think that to the point of community building and the groups that you ally yourself with and the kind of social spaces that the university provides, especially if you go to a larger school, I feel like. I taught for a while at a really small school, and it just doesn't provide the kind of variety of social spaces and, I mean, for lack of a better word, networking opportunities and kind of people that will be your people moving forward. I went to graduate school at UC Santa Barbara, and my advisor there, who's passed away since, but who was a lovely man, built a lab where the lab was also a community. And so that allowed us to kind of build a network that allowed us to kind of work together for qualifying exams and comprehensive exams and still be kind of intimates at this point in career and work on projects together, and the like. So I think all of that kind of logic of community building was a crucial part of the college experience. I was thinking the other day, my niece started at CUNY, East Coast people, to the University of New York, last fall, and she was debating schools and the like, and it's totally one of these things where I think you'll make a decision and you'll make good with that decision. Like the school will work for you if you can find a space inside the school. So I think it was good in that sense. In terms of, to hit on some of the themes that Jessica mentioned, I have UC Merced's majority minority school. We have, kind of people from all over. We have a large Southeast Asian population. We have a larger African American population than a lot of the, I think all the other UCs, to be honest with you. And one of the things that we kind of strive for in the bio-anthro community is, and this is kind of predates all of the COVID and all of these things. It's been going on for, God, since 2007, I think, a big, large-scale project aimed at increasing diversity in the evolutionary fields, because bioanthro is very STEMmy, and there's generally, it's not a very diverse kind of group, but you have people in it who have kind of taken this on to the extent that there are whole programs worked into our national meetings where they bring undergrad and grad students in early and facilitate kind of direct mentorship with people in the community to kind of build not just this kind of peer network that I've been talking about, and I think everybody's been talking about, but this multi-generational network, so that you kind of have people to rely on at all kind of career stages as you move your way through the discipline, if you choose to stay in the field. And I think it's been an important thing, and it's led to, I've published with students that I've worked with through those projects. And it just provides, again, a sense of community when you're at the big meetings. And, the national meetings are thousands and thousands of people. So having a space to exist and a community to be comfortable with in those spaces, I think, is important. And I think much more than the SAA, which is kind of bad at this. The bio side does a really good job. So, thank you.
Okay. I was like, that didn't sound right. Thank you for sharing your college experience with the audience. How does your identity, being Latinx, Latina, in addition to other identities, gender, sexuality, class, etc., influence your work and general experiences in higher education?
Okay, and I think all of my answers have overlap with our questions. Sorry about that. But it really, they really do all kind of intersect or dance with each other. And it goes back, as I was saying, coming, being first generation, being daughter of immigrants, really coming from, like I said, my parents, my immediate family, are from a small town, small village in Mexico. And being interested in archaeology, being in, and I guess to backtrack to that, as my introduction said, I study the relationships between humans and dogs and the use of dogs as tools for hunting. And really, the question goes back to why would societies, right, small scale societies, and taking into account all of the everyday things that you have to take care of, as you were mentioning, why on top of that would you then choose to invest in something like a dog? And if you have a dog, right, they're not cheap, right? Even even today, they need food. Now they need grooming and all these other stuff, but they at least need food and they need training if you want to use them to do something that you want, like hunting, for example. So why would small scale societies then, take away from their resources, right? Especially, and if you're familiar with, hunter gatherer, in any part of of the world, right? It's changing conditions, people moving from places, environments changing, people, and so there's a whole lot of things going on besides taking care of the dog, right? And so, and I could talk about that connection somewhere else, but for me, it comes down to why people choose to do that. It's not just thinking optimally. So there is evolutionary models that I work with. I will not bore you with that, but I love to talk about that, and we can if you want to in our next smaller meeting. But it's really connecting to there are these evolutionary models and expectations, right, and things of thinking of optimizing, getting more for your buck kind of idea. But there's also these culture, these identities, these practices that also come into play, and I think we need to consider this. And I think that when our our data, just to make it broadly, is in meeting these evolutionary expectations, evolutionary models, I think that's really when our research becomes interested, because we have these set of expectations based on models, as I was mentioning. But when our data isn't quite matching to that, then it becomes a question of why isn't it happening that way? And I think that's really when us and as anthropologists are really interested in, okay, let's explore this other why. And I think that's what attracts me. As I said, it's because it's humans, we're not all the same, and yet we are. Um, and so it's just exploring these whys is really what interests me. And as I said, as a woman, as Mexican, then it also becomes to these gender roles that have now come into play today. They have not always been the same, and they've always shifted. And how does that intersect with these other models and things that we're seeing both in the archaeological record and through written records? So because even though I study prehistoric I guess, populations. So there's no written records. There are written records later on, and there are still cultures that are very much alive that you can turn to and begin to make not necessarily models. I think some people really hate the word models. It's just introducing models into people, and people become very. And I'm like, no, it's just a way of trying to explain things. And so when I say models, it's just me trying in a bubble in some and there's math involved, but I won't talk about that. Trying to figure out why these things are happening. And so I don't know if that answers the question, but in a nutshell, that's how my identity comes into play here.
Um, I want to say I think that one of the things I like about anthropology is that my identity is always at play in my work, and at some level, even I choose to do the kind of work I do to reflect elements of my identity. Right. So I work in Chile. I grew up in Chile. Right. So it's like my home. I've lived there for long periods of time. Um, I I'm a woman. I am interested in kind of that dichotomy in the way that people are treated. I grew up, like I said, as the child of an art historian, and I grew up in the '90s in this kind of moment of kind of severe um, engagement in, especially in the Bay Area, with kind of things that we do to our bodies. And so I study the practice of head shaping in the past, right, which is a deliberate alteration of the body imposed on children. to convey things about society. We don't do it anymore, but it was incredibly common in the pre-colonial era, and it's common globally. Um, but it's just one of kind of bodily alterations. In the Mesoamerican case, and we have a little bit of it in Chile, but significantly less, there's also piercings, right? So there's like lip piercings, huge librets, and things like this that affect the body. So this kind of question, I think, drove a lot of my early work because it helped me learn about kind of me and the way I interacted with society and space. And as I got older and things happened, like I became a mother, right? And so then my relationship to understanding why you would bind to the head of your child became a different kind of understanding, because I was then kind of trapped in this cultural space about how we treat our babies, right? And how we treat our babies is incredibly cultural, right? So I had a baby surrounded by my family, and we treat our babies one way. And my baby's father is white, is Jewish. Like, they treat their babies differently, right? And they do different things to their babies. Circumcision, right, is the thing that comes to mind. So there's this kind of realization that this thing that is incredibly biological, right, like having a child, reproduction, is completely enmeshed in how we play it out culturally. And it has taken, for example, this practice that I studied, that I did my dissertation on, that I've written endless words about shaping the heads of children as a signifier of group identity, of social identity, of society, right? We do this because we are, in the case of the populations that I work with, this particular group, and we shape our heads differently than the group that lives in the neighboring river valley, because we want to be different from those people, right? We want to impose this kind of cultural difference to kind of interpretations that I've taken more recently, looking at kind of nuances of head shape that suggest to me that maybe what we're looking at is what people think is the proper way to treat a baby, right? And so in the literature, again, sorry to keep indicating you, but in the Mexican literature, where even though there aren't texts, there's hieroglyphs and there's pre-colonial documents that can provide us with information. There's all kinds of interesting things about head shaping in the Mesoamerican case as ways that we keep the soul inside the child, right? As ways that we make the child whole, etc. And it's not this kind of top-down model of the state, like the Inca. I don't know, again, if how much Inca coverage you've had. The Inca said that you had to do this a certain way. The Inca mandated that head shaping and dress and other things play out in a certain fashion. But maybe individual mothers or individual caretakers make other decisions for their children because that's an intimate choice, right? So I think every time I grapple with a thing in my world and decisions that I make about my life or my child's life, things like this in my world, I also grapple with the people that I study, right? How would this kind of situation have happened? What happens in conflict and war? What happens in child rearing? What happens, in general? How do we kind of move forward in those spaces? So I think that it is intimately tied to the kind of anthropology that I do.
Okay, so my work is in the town that I grew up in. So my identity is like very central to the kind of work that I do. And it's something that I didn't really decide to do until, again, later on. I was definitely a late bloomer. And I actually read a book last fall called Pollution is Colonialism. And the name of the author escapes me, but they write about how they think it's important in all kinds of research for the populations that are being studied to eventually get to a place where they can do their own research on their own populations. And that really stuck to me because I feel like if I am in a position now where I'm educated and I have these tools to my disposal, these resources at my disposal, I started to feel like I had a responsibility almost to go back to my hometown and use what I had learned to apply it in some way, to make it useful for them in some way. So yeah, that was something that I'm still kind of grappling with, because that, like, what that means for the future is difficult to know at all times. I was gonna say something else and I totally blanked. Something about, but yeah, my identity is like a Mexican, a migrant. My family is farm working. I've worked in the fields as well. And when you talk about like things that like your body shows you about culture, right? As a farm worker, there's a lot of things done to our bodies that are not fully in our control, that kind of hurt us, and like pesticides or just heat stroke, like all of these things show up in our bodies, and we had no choice but to be exposed to them, right? So that kind of makes me very angry, and it makes me upset that we are kind of like exploited essentially to for the benefit of others that we, or for like profit that we never see. So that was something that really caught my attention, and makes it me feel like if somebody's gonna do it, it has to be me, right? Because I live here. I know what it's like firsthand to grow up in this community. I know what it's like for my parents. I know what it's like for my friends, for their families. So I need to go back and try to understand what's happening here, and then turn around and give them back that information, because to a certain extent, because I don't live there anymore, it doesn't even belong to me anymore as well. And it's just trying to disrupt these patterns of like collecting data and taking it away, and now using it. I'm going to write my thesis and benefit. I'm going to get my master's, and this community that helped me, that really like, that essentially raised me, is just never going to kind of get a return on the investment that they made on me, right? So I think I just feel like I need to go back and work with them and work alongside them, and also at the same time being careful to not, like, who I am or what I want for this community a lot of times is irrelevant, and it's really more about what the community wants for itself. And so I'm also trying to be careful that even though I have maybe certain tools and knowledge that they don't have, that doesn't make me a voice of authority in this space, right? I'm here like as a I'm here kind of like to serve, but not to actually tell people what to do, which is also like a very interesting role to play. And again, that's like something that I didn't really decide to do until really like I read that book, and I was like, maybe this is choosing me. Maybe I don't really like have. I mean, we always have a choice, but I guess I'm trying to answer the call. I don't know if that sounds weird. But yeah, that's kind of like how my identity really, and it's again like it's not something that I consciously chose to do, because I had no choice, right? Like where I was born, like who I was born. But now I'm trying to like make the best of it, I guess, um, or really like step into that identity and really like own it. So yeah, I think it's a journey that never stops, right? Like you never find yourself being like, okay, like I understand now. I know everything. I know exactly what I want to do. Like it's always at every stage going to surprise you and push you in a direction that you never thought that you would go. Like I was very eager to move away. Right? I love Santa Cruz because it was so different than where I lived. And now I'm over here thinking like, oh, like do I need to move back to continue doing this? Like is that what that's gonna look like? So again, like the answer is never as easy as like saying yes or no, or I know for a fact that this is what I'm gonna do. It's just always, I'm sure that in the future too, like as I take on different identities, right? Like what if I also become a mother one day? How does that change? Like do I want my children to grow up in the exact same place that I grew up and be exposed to like the same like environmental factors that I was? Those are all things that are very much outside of academia, but that still are going to influence the work that I choose to do. Or maybe it pushes me to work even harder, right? Because I want my children to, and this is like a very hypothetical scenario, but still something. My imaginary children, I want a good future from my imaginary children. But no, I mean, people are going to continue to move there and live there, so they're very real children, deserve a healthier future. And can I be like a little help in that direction? And I mean, there's a lot of people already doing work in the Central Valley that is for generations, for decades that have been doing this work, and I'm just really trying to add another body, I guess, to that effort. But yeah, I hope that answers the question.
Um, okay. The sorry, words are escaping me today. What advice can you give to us students that helped you during your own academic journey?
I'm going to restate, I think, something that I said 2 questions ago, which is this notion of community and an understanding that the community you build in a place can come with you, right? We're lucky enough to live in an era where I mean, to the detriment in a lot of other ways, but you are constantly connected, right? So I built my closest friends inside the academic community, right? And they're not, okay, most of them are anthropologists, but they're not all anthropologists, right? Like one of them is my freshman year roommate who I was randomly assigned to. Like some of them are just people I've kind of built networks with along the way, and we are a community that helps in times of like tremendous emotional and mental stress, right? So things like the COVID experience and all of the horrible things that were associated with the COVID experience, as well as kind of whatever we're old people things are happening to us. So that community of people who are the same people who read my dissertation and talked me down from, being upset about my qualifying exams are the same people who help me kind of process personal things and are the same people who help me make sure that a publication is strong and that my field season runs smoothly, and the like. And so I think, I mean, to the point that I think Jessica made at the beginning, like it's this idea of people. And so when you find someone or multiple someones who are there for you and you can be there for them, I think you should carry them forward, right? And they may, one of my closest friends from always, who have like, she's a bartender. She's nothing to do with this. It doesn't matter though, because like she's part of my community, and she likes hearing about my work because it's entertaining to her, right? And I like hearing about her work because it's highly entertaining to me. And so we kind of bolster each other so that you understand that work, and in a field like anthropology, or at least in my perspective, in a field like anthropology where the work is everything, right? And you can't wander around looking at people and interacting in society without thinking about work, because you're thinking about class and gender and the all the historical contingencies that got communities into these spaces. That you know that your community is kind of there for you as well. I don't know. And I think, I mean, and this is just me coming from like way the other side of it. I think that there are so many hoops put in the academic kind of structure that it is in your best interest to treat them like a game, right? And not hinge so much of you on the hoop, right? On whether everything is perfect at that defense or that exam, because it's ultimately this kind of long, complex game, and all of us who are putting you through that game, for lack of a better word, we've all come out the other side, and none of us was perfect, right? None of us did it exactly as we wanted to. All of us stressed about it, but having the perspective that it's not, there's real life or death things, and these aren't them, is important.
I kind of want to echo that very strongly. I think, like, yes, like friends and family or whoever, right, is just keeping you going is probably the most important thing that you can have. They, like, somebody doesn't need to be in anthropology to understand what it's like to feel overworked or to feel stressed or to feel like you're not good enough. So if you have people there who see you and who support you, that's really going to be the the greatest, I guess, treasure you can have as a academic or really whatever it is that you're doing. But those you can't do it alone. You really can't. I think. I mean, you can definitely try, and it's gonna be a lot of work, and you're gonna have probably a lot of horrible time. Yeah, and and it's just a lot more fun. I mean, you especially. I mean, speaking specifically about going through academia. Going through academia is, I don't know if I can cuss, but if I could cuss, I would say it's very hard, right? It's not something that anybody really even teaches you how to do at all. Like, there's no manual. It looks very different for all of us, depending on what we want to do or what we like to do. We have no idea what we want to do. And that's okay. Like, that's going to happen. That's normal. But if you have people there to remind you of that, or if you have people there to share experiences with, to complain to, these are the things that are going to be make it easier to come back to the classroom, right? Make it easier to keep pushing, keep writing, keep going. Because otherwise, I think it's not about, like you're saying, like, it's not about the work. It's about you doing the work. It's about you having this passion and desire to be in the field that you're in. Like, that's really what drives us and makes us do other things. So a big part of that is having people to do it with, having people to talk about it with. So I mean, I share my proposal like with my boyfriend all the time. He's like, I don't know what any of these words mean, but I'll read it, and like that's like very encouraging, because then it doesn't make me feel like I'm going insane, like alone in my head. So I'm just like, does this make sense? Like, do you understand what I'm saying? He's like, nope, but I think it sounds great. Like, I think that's a good sign that I don't understand what you're saying. So yeah, like, people will really push you through, and yeah, I don't know of anything that has helped me more. There's been so many times I wanted to quit. I mean, like I said before, like, I failed multiple classes, and that was really scary, because I was like, what? How am I gonna tell my mom that I just got an F in a freaking university class? Like, but the fact that, like, there is another side, and that there was people that were just like, yeah, you failed. Like, that sucks. Like, I failed too, and that makes it feel like it's definitely not life and death, and you can get through it if you can have people that help you accept it for what it is. So that is definitely like, and if I mean, it is hard, especially like post COVID. And I know I've heard that, like, your campus just got back to being more in person. Online can be a very lonely thing for sure. But I think it's so important to have a balance. Like, I had friends in college. I'm still friends with all my college roommates as well, and they're doing totally different things. But I saw some of them focus like 100% on classes in school, and then later on, they would tell me, like, I kind of regret not having more of a social life. I kind of regret not trying to do other things. And I was always jealous of them because they weren't failing classes. But at the same time, I'm kind of glad that I tried to have more of a work-life balance, and tried to become involved in, like, organizations, and just getting to know people. I feel like being antisocial is a lot more common probably now, especially in, like, the age of social media. So just, if you're uncomfortable doing it, if you're scared doing it, then you're doing it right. Like, you're pushing yourself, and you're growing in a way that is going to push you forward. So yeah, don't be afraid of people, I guess. If you're an anthropologist and you're afraid of people, maybe you should rethink a little bit what you're doing. I mean, I'm very antisocial too, or kind of awkward, but just try, I guess, is my advice.
Definitely the people, the community, the have your support team. I think it's actually one of the most important advice that you can get. So, so to add to that one, I usually have three general ones. There's more specific ones depending on the conversations we can have. But I guess to add two more, one of them really ties into, and they both actually do. So my first one would be, if you decide to continue on to, like, graduate school, be sure you're working with a PI, with an advisor that you want to work with. Be sure you want to live in that school, that in that area where that school is located. As I said, I've gone through different things on my personal life, from COVID. Actually had a baby last year, and my PI. So now at UC Davis. I guess I forgot to mention I'm at Davis now. I'm at UC Davis now. And my advisor, Dr. Erkins, and my co-advisor, Dr. Darwin, they were actually very supportive during my pregnancy. It wasn't like completely planned pregnancy, but I was very happy, and I'm very happy to be a mom. It also brings into that perspective of that work life balance that if you haven't learned now, you should probably learn. But choosing, because these will also be part of your community, and if you have advisors, mentors that can guide you through these changes in lives, because there's this thing, that we are, this is there is the academic side of your life, but there's a whole lot of other life that's going on, and neither of them stop. And so that's the first thing that you have to, I guess, make peace with, and then learn how to balance them. And so I think having that community, as we've been stressing out, I think that's super important. Whether they're academics or outside of academia, have your people, have your team, have your support, and appreciate them, be there for them, but also allow yourself to get help from these people. And then my other advice, I guess, is the same thing. You're not just a student. You're not just an academic. You're more than that. You're a friend. You're somebody's parent, maybe. You're a child. You're a friend, and allow yourself to be that. Allow yourself that space to be all of whatever it is that you are, because yes, like we will hit bumps in the academic career. Um, you know, Unexpected life changes, and you want to be able to have something else that you know, COVID hits, and you're no longer allowed to access your collections. Like, oh, now what do I do with all my time? Or another everything shuts down, and it's like, okay, so now what do I do if I can't go to class? You want to have other things that you could say, this is also who I am. I'm not just a student. And it goes back to different things, when life changes, when your proposal doesn't come through, when the funding doesn't come through, when, things change and it's like, oh no, you can no longer work on these things. You have other things, to, to hold you, to ground you, and to remind you that you're human and you're allowed to change your mind, just like you're allowed to change your projects. um, yeah, thank you.
There we go. Okay. Yep, it's good. So actually, I just wanted to stress a couple things that the three of you just said about being in higher education and mentorship. The first thing was really, it goes for all of us, right? That having a mentor, whoever that person is, whether it's a grad student that's a few years ahead of you, or a professor, or a friend, or just someone that helps guide you, I think in all aspects of our life is something that's so important. And also that giving the balance, I'm so glad you all talked about the fact that, we're not just academics. I know most of you see us in a classroom, and then you don't realize that we exist in other aspects of life too. And so that balance, though, is so important because it makes this work also, I think, more meaningful when we bring our whole person to what we do. One last thing I have to say. So those of you who are in my class or have taken my class, one of the first things I tell you is none of you are going to go have a job as a hermit, right? We've talked about how we're social creatures. We have to live in community. We have to be with other people. And that's why it's so important to take classes like this and to learn about the human experience. Although, Andrea, I do have to say that cultural anthropologists like us have a stereotype of actually not being very social people, which is kind of funny since that's what we do. So before we get to some questions, I just wanted to say one more thing about community, which is that I wanted to actually thank the LatinaX Heritage Planning Committee because without their support and community building, which is something that's been happening year-round and brings all of us together, without that support, we wouldn't be able to put on events like this. So before we get to questions, if we could just give a round of applause for our Latinx Heritage Planning Committee. Thank you so much. Okay. So we have a few minutes for questions. So if you have a question from the audience, want to raise your hand, we'll bring a mic on over to you. And we will, so I think there's a mic right there.
My question is, according to the U.S. Department of Education's last 2020, only 4% of all college students take major in anthropology. And each year, there is only 9,310 have given a bachelor's degree and 850 an associate's degree in anthropology. Now, my question is, why anthropology is not as attractive as other major classes?
I give a somewhat bureaucratic answer to that as chair of my department. I think the experience that we have about 50, we're a small institution, we have about 50 majors. It is about 4 to 5% of the undergraduate student body. I think that in the UC system, if my memory serves, it can be as high as 9%, which is actually pretty decent, I feel like. And I think that it comes down to the point that Anastasia made at the beginning, which is that the kind of U.S. educational system doesn't include it, right? The secondary school educational system. So people don't know what it is, right? And so I think a lot of people get introduced to anthropology, at least, again, and the people who talk to me, right? They're going to come through because they've either hidden from the hard sciences and are taking my intro to bio anthro class, or they're really interested in forensics, right? So they're coming this kind of route of criminology, justice kind of things. And I think because there's no exposure to it in adolescence, and then it's huge, right? I think that's the other thing, that if you think about it, because like there's people who study primates, there's people who study humans, there's people who study humans millions of years ago, there's people who study humans alive now. It doesn't fall into that kind of niche of clearly defined. And so you have people who take the things they've learned in anthropology. Most of our majors, and again, I'm not going to speak for you all or the other UCs, but most of our majors actually end up in things where they have to interact with people. So we have a lot of social workers, we have a lot of people in kind of health-related fields, public health kinds of things. We have a lot of people who become teachers, right? They just have kind of this broad view of humanity, et cetera. So I think it's just kind of a casualty of the way that we teach our kids in this country. But, you know, it's variable, I think.
I think I would also like to say that higher education is a huge investment, and a lot of times you're worried that will I get a return in this investment, right? So anthropology sometimes doesn't have like that clear path to a very secure economic future, and that's something that I think about all the time, right? It's like, or I really hate getting asked like, what are you gonna do with that? Because I'm just like, that's a good question. I don't know. I'll figure it out. But I think that's probably another thing. STEM related fields are very attractive because they have jobs that are like high paid, and like you have like more chance of having that economic stability, which is becoming even more important, right, as we age. So I would say that that's probably something, at least personally, that made anthropology kind of like a difficult choice, because it was like, well, I don't know what I'm gonna work in, but I'm just gonna trust that this passion that I have for it will yield different kind of rewards. But not everybody has that luxury to say like, I don't have to worry about money, or I don't have to, if I'm going back to school or if I'm taking out loans, like I can just focus on what I love and not have to worry about the money part of it, right? So I think that's probably like a huge factor as well.
What are you going to school for? I said, girl, I'm going to be an anthropologist. She said, girl, you can't get no job doing that. And then I thought about it. You can actually be your own boss and you can create your own setting. And I figured it out. I said, well, I guess that's what those nonprofit agencies and businesses like that, like have Habitat to Humanity. Most of those people, I said, they're probably anthropologists. They have to be some kind of anthropologists that, the Habitat for Humanity, the people that build houses and communities where there are multiple different incomes, but they're kind of like, to me, an anthropologist is like someone that help someone succeed in like a maybe a poverty type of setting or a different environment where they grew up in to move them into a better position. Is that what the anthropologist, cultural anthropologist does?
I will say that I'm currently looking for a job, and a lot of the skills that I see are like, are you a people person? Are you able to like have these good interpersonal skills, right? And I think that anthropology does give you a really solid basis for, nobody can really teach you how to be social or how to be like good at networking, and I think anthropology allows you the opportunity to develop those skills that are very people-oriented skills, which at the end of the day become very important for like a wide variety of employers, right? I think like for an employer to know that you're good with people is very important. It's almost maybe sometimes more important than having to know exactly, because they can train you on technical skills, right? You can learn how to do a job, but can you learn how to talk to people? Can you do that well? So yeah, I think Dr. Torres made this point that like it's a field that has such a wide variety of careers attached to it, and that's like the strength, but it's also the thing that makes it very intimidating because there is no clear path to a lot of those careers. But what they all have in common is that you have kind of like a very open-minded and like general understanding of how people work and why they work that way. And I think that is a skill that is translatable to a lot of different careers. So yeah, like I'm also considering the nonprofit sector because at the end of the day, it's all about people, kind of like. So yes, like anthropologists are needed to really consider like if this organization is working to create public policy, does this policy accurately reflect the lives that these people live like on a day-to-day basis, right? And I think that's a good place for an anthropologist to exist in. I don't know if you guys have anything to add to that.
I just wanted to add that as an archaeologist, there's also a private side, so not just the academic side. So there is this thing called cultural resource management, which I myself have worked through my master's and even in the summers now. So there is a private side, and you can get a job with an anthropology degree. And even with a certificate from a community college, some firms would hire you to do CRM or cultural resource management, which is basically doing archaeology in here in the city even. And we can talk about that if you have questions too. I know we're running out of time, so just very wanted to add that.
Actually, on that note, I will say if you want to talk about big job growth, the big job growth in anthropology, in addition to healthcare, which I know a lot of you are taking this as pre-nursing majors, but also cultural resource management or working in archaeology, here is actually very much a growing field. So definitely think about speaking with Jessica about those kinds of jobs. So we're going to end in just a moment. I want to turn things over to Oscar. You picked up the microphone, so I feel like we're going to do a duet here, Oscar.
Okay, thank you.
Want to turn it over to you, Oscar. Just this is the last event for LatinaX Heritage Month, and so again, wanted to thank everyone for coming out to all the great events that were happening for the last month, and really just a testament to Mikasa and the CIB Center for Inclusion and Belonging, and everyone who's sort of helped out with these events. I want to thank our panelists once again for coming today. They will join us over on LRC 103 in probably about 10 minutes or so if anyone wants to ask them additional questions. But before we wrap up, two things. One, if you came in late, please be sure to sign in the sign-in sheet in the back. And two, I will turn it over to Oscar for any last remarks.
Thank you. Oscar Mendoza Plasencia. And I came here not knowing what to expect. And I saw myself reflected in every one of the stories about changing majors and, finding everything. But I want to thank Anastasia and also the committee that brought these voices, not just today, but previously. Because one thing that I learned is that you cannot be what you cannot see. And they're showing us what you could be, right? And I know that some jobs are difficult, especially when you're the only Latina, the only female. But you're holding it down, so I thank you for that. And you made me reflect about a lot of stuff. And I thank you, and I thank Anastasia, and also you for you being here. And I hope you take the time to get to know them better. Chances, opportunities like this don't come often. And please take advantage of those opportunities. So if you are able to meet with them and chat with them any further, please do so. And thank you very much. And I don't know how this is a great way to conclude the Hispanic Heritage Month, the LatinaX at CRC. So thank you very much.